So Jeff Beck has come to speak to us. I know that a lot of you wrote to me and were very excited that Jeff was coming. He has a wonderful reputation as an inspirational speaker. He's an author, a speaker, a radio anchor, and he's also the national spokesperson for, now get this right, the International OCD Foundation. And he's also the founder of the Advocacy Alliance. And if any of you read my blog, all of you, right? You'll see a link to that organization from last week, and I'd like to recommend that you all go to that site, like it on Facebook, follow it. I think exciting things are going to be happening with that. And I know that you're going to talk about that in a moment. But Jeff is here to speak to us about mental health from an angle that's slightly off of eating disorders, but I think is very, very relevant. He's going to talk about advocacy and media coverage of mental health, and especially of OCD. So, welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Laura. Now, just 1 second here. I'll get this going. There we go. Good morning. It is such a privilege to be here. And Laura, thank you so much for inviting me to come and be a part of this. I'm in awe of what your leader has done. I have the privilege of working with a lot of organizations at the very grassroots level, and I don't know that I've ever seen a better example of what my organization, Adversity to Advocacy, is about than this one, which is just somebody taking adversity and turning it into really powerful advocacy on behalf of other people that can benefit from the unique empathy and experience that only comes through adversity. So Laura, I really salute you, and all of you who are part of this as well. I am so thrilled to be here. This is a first for me. I have spent the past 5 years crisscrossing the country, giving talk after talk, telling my story ad nauseum. But this is the first time I've ever spoken specifically within the eating disorder community. And as you're about to hear, I am part of that community. And it's such an honor to be here today and to share with you what I call a 3-hat perspective, as opposed to a 2-hat perspective, and hopefully that will make more sense in just a moment here. So the first thing I want to clear up is just who is this guy and why is he here? So I'm a radio anchor by trade. I make my living in San Francisco at KCBS Radio. It's the only thing I really know how to do is just talk and use junkies, so it works out pretty well. But when I'm not on the air, I'm a passionate advocate, and my arena has been OCD. So I am the national spokesperson for the International OCD Foundation, which almost sounds like a punchline these days, right? I know you're all thinking, does he carry around Purell in his pocket? Just to clear that up, the answer is yes. I try not to use it too much these days, but it's always there. I've written a couple of books, and you'll hear about them in the course of my talk, just as they're relevant to how things unfolded for me. So there's only one thing. OCD is known as the doubting disease, and there's really only one thing I can tell you with great certainty in my world, and that is that my expertise is in doubt. Because I've discovered that this really is the perfect double entendre. There are a few people that you're going to ever meet in your life that understand uncertainty and have lived with uncertainty to the extent that I have. That being said, because I have OCD, I really can't help but doubt the veracity of what I just told you. So my expertise is indeed very much in doubt. So I'm wearing 3 hats today, and again, this is very exciting for me because I normally just wear 2 hats. So let me walk through that with you. The first hat is that of a professional journalist, and Laura asked me to share with you some thoughts about working with the media and how you might, as advocates, best utilize the media to convey the message that's so important to get out there about eating disorders. And I've given a lot of talks in this arena, and my goodness, for the past 20 years I've worked with organizations about how to work effectively with the media. So that hat I'm used to wearing. The second hat, I really didn't know what to put as a hat for an OCD advocate, so I thought maybe just the guy that looks like he's really concerned about every germ in the room. It's probably a good hat to put on for that. And again, this is a hat that I've worn now for about 5 years, and it's been an amazing, amazing privilege to become a voice and a face for OCD awareness. And I'll share with you along the way some thoughts about how I have worked with the media on the other side of the camera, on the other side of the microphone, as an advocate trying to get a message across. And then the final hat is my father hat. And I just have to tell you how excited I am that I found this image on the internet, because I have this hat. And every time I put it on, my entire family cringes. Because I have very fair skin and I burn really easily. And the older I get, the more sensitive I am to that. So when we go out, I think it's personally reasonable that I put on my sun hat. My family disagrees. And they typically walk a few steps back. So I couldn't find a better hat to represent my father role than my sun hat. And this is the one that's brand new for me. This is the first time that I've had permission from my daughter to share our story about living with eating disorders. And I'm going to try to get through this today without breaking down, because this is really an emotional turning point for me and my family. And I'm just, again, so privileged to be here to do it today. So let me start by talking a little bit about OCD advocacy. How many of you are familiar with OCD? Quick show of hands. How many of you actually have it though? It's amazing, because 5 years ago, when I first went public and started talking about OCD, if I asked that question and people were being honest, maybe it was about a quarter of the audience that knew about OCD. Now, to be fair, this is an audience that is in the eating disorder community, and there is a great deal of comorbidity, and there's a great deal of crossover and so forth. So it makes sense that you would always be ahead of the curve, and it's wonderful to know that. But it really has been fascinating to me to see over the years that the level of understanding about OCD, on the one hand, has really climbed in terms of awareness. On the other hand, I don't know if you've noticed, but the term itself has really become misused in our vernacular. We're going to talk a little bit about that and the challenges that that presents as an advocate. So for those, maybe one or two people in the room that aren't really familiar with OCD, I'm going to give you the world's quickest overview of what OCD is, only because I think it's relevant to the background I'm going to share with you here. So this cartoon, and I'll give you just a second to read it. I love this. We with OCD really are overly internal with our thinking, and we tend to obsess, which is to say that we get intrusive thoughts really stuck in our head. And the best example I can give is this. Have you ever had a, the earbud, that you get something stuck in your head? If you're having trouble with that right now, let me help you. It's a small world, after all. You'll be thanking me in about 3 hours. So I want you to imagine for a second, those of you who have not experienced OCD, that you have that looping around your head. It's a small world, after all, over and over again. But now I want you to turn up the volume from say a 10 to about 100. And replace "it's a small world" with the very worst possible horrific what-if question you could ask yourself. And now you're getting a taste of what OCD is. So that's what an OCD obsession is. I know nothing about neuroscience other than that there are a number of explanations for why those of us with OCD do what this poor gentleman does, which is to just regurgitate things in our head over and over again. There are biological reasons for it. My particular obsessions are about harm. And so this is just one almost random flavor of what OCD can manifest itself as. And my fear has always been that I might unknowingly, through my negligence, harm or potentially harm someone or something. And again, the key there is unknowingly, because at the core of OCD is always the uncertainty. And it's the question of, well, what if I did this, and what if I didn't realize that I had harmed somebody? So over the years, I have developed quite an ability to think through the absolute worst that could possibly happen in any situation. I take great pride in the fact that I really can find that. And I've also started a collection of hazard labels, because I decided that if in fact my career as a news guy and or a public speaker should fall through, I have been uniquely trained to make warning labels. And so this is one of my favorite that I ran across a year or two ago. This is the top of a champagne bottle. I guess I don't need to explain this. I like the fact that someone has thought through that if you were to take the champagne bottle and aim it directly at your eye, it would not be a good thing. So that's the obsession side. So those of us with OCD, we have these horrific thoughts that get stuck. And then what we do is we develop compulsions, which are simply, often and almost always, nonsensical rituals trying to rid ourselves of the uncertainty. And so if we're concerned that our hands are dirty, we will scrub our hands until they're bleeding. If we are concerned that something horrible might happen if we don't do something in sets of 3, then we will do things in sets of 3 as a ritual. My particular flavor is checking for the most part, and also washing. I have what's called reverse contamination concerns. So the Purell that I carry is not to protect me from your germs, it's to protect you from my germs. Now, seriously, as a matter of pride, I no longer scrub my hands before giving talks and meeting people in public. So should you choose to greet me afterwards, you do so at your own risk. I no longer take responsibility for it. So as an OCD checker, again, this is completely nonsensical, but I will just check things over and over and over again. I know all of you get a taste of that in your day-to-day life. I mean, we all double back to check a garage door. We all might think to ourselves, did I turn off the oven, that sort of thing. But those of us with checking issues just really take it over the top. And what's really amazing to me is that I could get to the hotel and discover that I had left a toothbrush at home. Because of all people, I mean, wouldn't you think that I would really check my list over and over again to make sure that the toothbrush was in there? Apparently not. I need to check a little bit better. And then this is just one of my favorite all-time cartoons. This is a gentleman, very much could be me several years ago. Now think about this for a second. At first I saw it, okay, the guy's in a dark room using a flashlight to make sure that he turned off the lights. But that really gets at just how nonsensical all of this is. So with that as background, in 2007 I went public for the very first time, and prior to the publication of my first book, maybe there were 5 to 10 people in my entire world who knew that I was battling a mental illness, obsessive compulsive disorder. And I had plenty of time to prepare myself for having the story out there, because this is really an overnight success story that just happened to take 10 years to unfold, because I took 10 years to write and rewrite and rewrite. And I'm laughing about that, but at the same time, let me tell you, if I didn't have the editor that I had, this book would never be published, because as you can imagine, as an OCD checker, signing the galleys with vinyl print that had to go out to the printer, my editor, boy did she hear from me, I think we should change the semicolon on page 317 to a period. I mean, 10 minutes later, I think we should change it back to a semicolon. But the book did get published, and while I had prepared myself for all these years to have my story out there, I really hadn't prepared myself to be an advocate. And as you guys know, there is a whole set of skills around that is really far beyond just having your story out there. It's being able to share your story in a constructive way. And largely that means dealing with the media, which ironically I was a part of. So I was able to garner a lot of attention to my story, and probably more than I should have, in fact, just because the media tends to really like to report on the media. I mean, it's just a reality. So as a guy in the media who was out there talking about OCD, I attracted a lot of attention, and I was able to become a face and a voice for OCD. It took a little while to get used to that. Jeff Bell, obsessive compulsive. I mean, that was my new name. I mean, might as well just call me OC, not JZ. And so I was amazed by how much publicity and interest the story got. And again, this was probably at the early edge of a curve that would really spike in terms of interest in OCD. And so I spent a lot of months crisscrossing the country and doing interviews and sharing my story. And it was really interesting because this is a Sacramento Bee piece with a headline that actually, I didn't mind, but it really kind of said the whole thing. Bell's battle was a very public battle. We talk about public and private battles. Well, Bell's battle was on the cover of newspapers, and it led to other interesting headlines like this one. Folks, this is the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle. It's my hometown paper. He is not a killer. He knows that now. But just to reinforce it, they do this like psycho thing over here. That makes you think, well, maybe he is a killer. And really ironically, I don't even play the piano, so I have no idea what I was learning a lot. And then the amazing opportunity of a lifetime falls into my lap, which was the New York Times asked if I'd be interested in writing something for them. Every journalist wants to do that. So I got to write about what it's like to dine out with an eating disorder. No, I'm sorry, with an OCD disorder. And that was a wonderful honor as well. And this image that they made for me of me in the restaurant. So my life changed significantly dealing with the media. And I got to be on the other side of the microphone. And it was a real learning experience because I do things as a journalist that probably drive speakers and academicians and advocates crazy in terms of the way I might structure an interview or cut people off with just a couple of minutes of time to tell their stories. You know, fascinating story, Mr. Smith, of how you turned your life around. You've got 90 seconds. Can you tell us all about it, please? Well, I all of a sudden was on the other side of that and kept finding myself thinking, well, what a stupid question that guy asked me, or why did he cut me off? And it really became an incredible learning experience for me about the other side of the equation, working with the media. And it informs everything that I'm going to share with you in terms of some tips when we get to that stage. And by the way, I want to mention something that I meant to mention at the very beginning. This is kind of the sampler Jeff Bell talk because I'm really going to squeeze a lot in because I'm trying to put all three hats on for you. The beauty of an event like this one that we're a part of, that I was talking to Laura in advance, is that I love the intimacy of this. So please consider this the opening round, and when you see me in the hallway for the next couple of days, please ask me any questions that you have, and we can pick up the conversation one-on-one or in small groups. I'm here to serve in whatever ways I can in terms of helping you understand the media and work with the media. So again, I just want to encourage you to pull me aside and talk more about this. So with the OCD Foundation, this was an organization that literally saved my life. It was one of the very first calls that I made after being misdiagnosed twice and learning that I actually did have OCD. And I am so fortunate, so blessed to be able to be play a role for this organization because, again, this is one that just changed my life. So I'm on the board of directors of this organization. I'm their national spokesperson, and I've helped shape their media for the past 3-4 years now. And it's been a great learning experience for me as well because I've really got a sense of what it takes to shape a message. And I know that as a community in the eating disorder world, this is a big challenge for you folks as well. And I want to talk some specifics in a minute or two, but I want to share with you a couple of the real challenges that we've had in the OCD community. Shortly after I went public and shortly after I started talking about OCD, the whole world, not because of my going public, by the way, started becoming very fascinated with OCD, just the timing of it all. And before we know it, there were 3, 4, 5 really successful television shows that were exploring, or some might say exploiting, OCD and anxiety disorders. The Hoarders series, I am blown away at how popular this thing is. I personally don't get it, I'm too close to it, but the thought that week after week people tune in to see these people with their incredibly cluttered apartments or homes. The F.E.A.S.T show, which I thought did a better job actually in some ways of showing what it's like to deal with OCD. The OCD project, which was on VH1, really concerned a lot of people in our community about the way some things were handled in terms of extreme exposure, for example, and treatment. But this is what we were having to deal with all of a sudden. We're trying to shape a message about what it's like to deal with OCD, and we've got these incredibly successful nationally broadcast programs out there that we have no control over the message that they're putting out, obviously, and the message was not consistent with the message that we wanted to put out. With Hoarders, for example, Some of the people involved in that project are very, very skilled practitioners. I know some of them. But by the nature of what they're doing with a cable series, they're not able to show any follow-up. So if you've ever seen the show, you see that people come in and clear out these apartments, and they move on to the next case. Well, it's not how you treat hoarding. And that's really been lost in the conversation. With the OCD project, there was quite a bit of depiction of what exposure therapy is about, but they wanted to take that to the extreme, have people lick the bottom of their shoe. Well, that's going to drive away a huge contingent of people out there who might otherwise be considering doing exposure therapy. And with F.E.A.S.T, much like with hoarders, they were unable to show any of the follow-up or even the processing to get people into the system. I mean, that would not make for good television to watch Dr. Jones and Sally Smith talk through what was ahead. So it really became a challenge for us. How do we help manage the message when it's been taken out of our control by the media? Okay. Another real area of challenge for us is this. My friend is so OCD. Those of you who have teenagers at home, you've probably heard this. Or stop being so OCD about keeping your car clean or whatever. OCD is not an adjective. It is not a synonym for fastidious or anal retentive. But unfortunately, it has become that in our society in 2012. So another real challenge for us right now in terms of message management is how do we get out the word that yes, there are aspects of OCD that the whole world can relate to, that when we're talking about OCD as a mental health disorder, we're talking about a neurologically based, chemically based brain disorder that has victims of dealing with this that will tell you it's in no way, shape, or form similar to having to wash your car every week because you want it to be clean. And so again, another real challenge of what we were up against. I'll circle back to that when we get to the media portion. Right now though, I want to talk about this part of my life that puts me in your community, part of the eating disorder community. This is Brianna. And she is now 18. And I am so proud. 3.5 years ago, Brianna, who had battled OCD for most of her life, started dealing with an eating disorder. And I can't begin to tell you how disappointed I am that my wife and I didn't see this happening. And this also is an aspect of why we, as an OCD eating disorder community, need to get the word out there in constructive ways with the media. Because right before our very eyes, our daughter morphed from a very healthy, athletic young woman to a 15-year-old that was in and out of Stanford Hospital 6 times, was rushed to the ER twice, was on a feeding tube 3 times, was on a suicide watch once, was in a residential program that proved to be horrific for our family. And when I look at that picture, gosh, I'm sorry, this is a little tougher than I thought. I am just so proud of my baby girl because she's fighting back. And it gives me great hope to see what's happening with her. I know I'm going to draw a lot of inspiration from all of you here. I've already had a chance to talk to a couple of you in the hallway who have daughters and sons who have been in Brianna's shoes and are coming out the other side. And I'm happy to report that Brianna, 3 years into this now, is maintaining her weight. She is heading off to college, which I would have never, ever thought possible 3 years ago. But when this started unfolding, I realized that as a member of the media, I had completely missed the story. Now, working in the Bay Area, there has been a fair amount of eating disorder news coming out that we've covered at KCBS. James Locke is at Stanford there, and I'm sure I've interviewed him before. I don't remember specifically, but I know that we've done a number of stories about eating disorders coming out of Stanford and UC Berkeley. We've certainly done stories about celebrities who have dealt with eating disorder issues. I mean, that's always the hook that seems to bring the media in. But quite honestly, I knew nothing about eating disorders, despite the fact that, again, a lot of people in the OCD community have that comorbid challenge of eating disorders. And Brianna, by the way, all of her OCD from, I think she started really young. I think we first noticed when she was about 5 or 6 years old. But all of the OCD was around eating issues. And so her issues were about expiration of foods, for example, expiration dates. And never did I see a pathway that would lead from all these issues around OCD checking, classic OCD checking. I mean, it really fit the OCD mold. She was in treatment for OCD because she was falling into all those classic OCD traps that one might expect when you're dealing with obsessions, and her obsessions were about food. And she would come to us as a 5 or 6 year old kid and hold up the thing of ketchup and say, "This expired last month, we should be eating this." You know, she'd want reassurance, classic OCD trap. She would want to check labels over and over again, classic OCD. But somewhere along the way, this thing started morphing, and it became so much more than OCD. And unfortunately, you can't treat an eating disorder the same way that you treat OCD. There are similarities and there are major differences. As I've come to learn, there is a payoff for somebody dealing with an eating disorder that we in the OCD community don't get, an even physiological payoff that greatly complicates how we address these things from a medical perspective. So Bree started morphing into this young woman that we didn't understand. And all of a sudden, the whole world looked a lot different to me. And as a journalist, I started seeing things that I'd never seen before. This. I never paid any attention to this before. I took this picture yesterday at the airport, by the way. And actually, I meant to take a picture with me for my slideshow, and I'd forgotten, so I thought, I'll just look by the magazine stand. I didn't have to rearrange anything. This is what came out. And am I missing something but men's fitness? Seriously? So yeah, we have a lot of really skinny women, right? I never noticed this stuff before. I never stopped. I've never been a teenage girl. I've never stopped and thought about the pressures of this on the world. And as much as I would like to say, well, I'm a journalist and I'm part of the media machine that does quality journalism, I'm part of that machine as well. Because more and more it is one machine. And the people who own those magazines own the stations that I work at and so forth. They don't literally. CBS, I should disclaim that. CBS does not own Men's Fitness magazine. But I am part of that machine. And I have to take a more proactive role in figuring out how the heck do we get some quality journalism into these things. How do we change that cover so it's not just some, emaciated woman giving those messages to my daughter and so many others? So I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about dealing with the media and how much I didn't know. And thank God for women like Laura, who was there to answer my phone answer her phone after I read her book and said help. Because here was this advocate going across the country and telling everybody how to battle OCD, and there's hope, folks, and we're here for you and whatnot. Then all of a sudden, my wife Samantha and I are looking at each other and going, we have no idea what we're doing. And the ultimate of that for us was being taught and putting our daughter into a residential program that insisted that we were the problem and wanted us out of the equation. I know this is a group that understands that very well. And I want you to know that I will do everything I can as a journalist, as a father, as an advocate, to make sure that as few parents as possible find themselves in our shoes, and perhaps a lot of their shoes, of being pulled out of the equation, because that proved to be a huge error, and one that no one has told me this more than Brianna, who, despite the fact that on Christmas Day of 2009, the low point of our lives, all but ran away from us when we went to visit her at this facility so she could exercise compulsively, and shouted at us that she didn't want to see us ever again. Later informed us what a cry for help that was. So let me talk briefly about the role of media, and specifically offer very few practical suggestions that I think might be helpful to those of you who are grassroots advocates. And again, this is a conversation that I could easily spend 90 minutes talking about for you. No. She's got this little clock going here. I love this. Laura was explaining to me before we got started. She goes, okay, someone out there's got signs. Is that right? You're going to hold up and say how many minutes are left? All right, well, maybe this has replaced that. She goes, I hope you don't mind. I'm the guy with OCD. Are you kidding? I love this. Where do I find this app? And can it accommodate things like time for conversation with wife and dinner and everything else, because I love it. So I will be finished in 16 minutes. But I do want to have this ongoing conversation with you throughout the conference, because there's so much I could share with you that I think might be helpful. I hope might be helpful. But let's talk in very broad strokes about working with the media. And now I'm putting on this hat and sharing with you, I want to pull back the curtain a little bit about what happens behind the scenes in a newsroom, and really encourage you to think like a news person or a news editor or an assignment editor when you are doing grassroots advocacy, because you have to play the game, so to speak, if you want to be able to effectively work with the media. So the first thing is you need to get to know your local media market. And it's different in Knoxville, Tennessee, and San Francisco, California, and New York. They're all different media markets, but if you are serious about wanting to do advocacy and really work with your local media, you need to know who they are. You can't just blindly throw out a news release and think that it's going to get, look, there's my 15-minute sign. Thank you. Stand up and show everybody the 15-minute sign, please. There we go. For the record, jives perfectly with the 15-minute. So, the first thing you want to do is get to know your local media. Get in the experts Rolodex. This is really, really important. The way this works is at KCBS, and we're an all news station, so we're kind of the extreme of doing this sort of thing, but we are news of the day. And I'm not proud to say that. I mean, if it were up to me, we would be exploring all kinds of wonderful issues and doing segments daily on eating disorders. Not going to happen. And realistically, if I'm being really honest with you, the next time that we're going to do something about eating disorders on KCBS is that day when some politician or some celebrity or somebody of some name announces that he or she has an eating disorder, or even worse, tragically, has died because of that eating disorder. That is the bottom line, harsh truth of what happens in today's 24/7 news cycle, news of the day. And so what you want to do is be in the Rolodex so that when that story unfolds and when Jeff's assignment editor at KCBS says, oh my gosh, Sally Jones, our senator, has just announced that she's battling anorexia, we need to do something on this. Who do we call? We go to the Rolodex and we see under eating disorders, there's Laura Collins. So who do we call? We call Laura. That is a big part of how you work with media. You also want to establish relationships with the key players, and especially those of you who are in smaller markets. You can introduce yourself to health reporters at your local papers and your local TV and radio stations, and even if you don't have a story for them right now, it's a good relationship to build. Finally, you want to make the media's job easier. The reality is those of us in the media are really pressed for time. It's not so much that we're lazy, although some of us are. It's more that we are doing more with less these days. We have, some of my colleagues at CBS TV are going out and literally, I'm not kidding, having to set up their own cameras, stand in front of them, and be camera person and reporter, because it's more with less these days. And so there's less time to do background checking and getting up to speed on various issues. The more you as advocates can do the work for the reporters, the more success you're going to have. Pitching the media. This is an art, and this is one that I think might be a good conversation to have in the hallway for those of you who are in this position. If you're a marketing coordinator for your local advocacy group, or you are an individual advocate that's wanting to put these words out, come find me, because I want to talk through some of these things in more detail. You have to think like an assignment editor. And again, an assignment editor is always looking for what is the best way for us to tap into today's news of the day. You need to write effective news releases. I'm going to show you one in a moment here, and some goods and bads. And you need to follow up. I'm just kind of blown away, and I really feel sorry for so many people doing so many great things out there. They blindly send dear news person emails or letters out there with a news release, and then they complain after the fact that, well, no one did anything with it. You've got to follow up. If you're going to send out a news release, make sure you send it to an individual and not blindly to an organization. Again, when I say get to know the key players, find out who the health reporter is at your local TV or radio station or the local paper. Find out a name of the assignment editor. Write that one down, assignment editor. That's a key term that you want if you're trying to pitch the media. It's really straightforward. There is an assignment editor in every newsroom. Often there are 3 or 4. I work in a shop that has 4. Find out a name. Establish a relationship with that. And even if you don't know that person, call the front desk and say, can I get the name of your assignment editor? And they say, oh, Bill Jones is our assignment editor. So instead of blindly sending off news releases, email Bill Jones. As far as he knows, you've met him before. You're saying, dear Bill, I mean, trust me, people do that to me all the time, and it works. So, this is a news release, and from the, this is from the state of California. That's who it's from. That's right. This makes perfect sense. So I'm going to show you a little bit of good and bad in this. The good, they always say you want to do the who, what, where, when, why sort of thing. Well, who, what, when, where. They've certainly covered those bases. On the other hand, that's a really, really dry news release. The headline, Media Advisory on the Interested Persons Meeting of the California Fair Political Practices Commission to seek public input on the fallout of those impacted by recent accounts of campaign fraud. There's a better way to put that out there, don't you think? You want to catch somebody's attention very quickly. But I wanted to show that because there are a couple things. You want to do the media's job for them as much as you can by giving them the who, what, when, where, how. Make the media contact information really clear. Let them know what the story is about. Really make it easy for them to do that. Now, maximizing the media interview, you got to do your homework in advance. Now I'm talking about those of you who've been asked to be on your local radio station to talk about dealing with an eating disorder, for example. Know who the host is. Know what they're looking for. Know what the show is about. Don't just blindly drop in there. It's their show. You're a guest on it. You want to be able to relate as best you can to what they are doing day after day on their show. Develop talking points. Well, I can't begin to tell you how important this is. You've got to stay on topic. Of course, politicians are the ultimate experts, right? You can ask Senator Smith, why he's planning on cutting funding for eating disorders, and before you know it, Senator Smith can say, that's a great question, Jeff, and I will loop back to that in a moment. But first, I'd like to tell you about why crime has dropped 12% in my district. And before you know it, the time's up. Talking points. You've got to do what Senator Smith does, but in a less than private way, and really stay on topic of what you're doing. Be effective during the interview. Think about telling stories. Statistics, blah. Okay, and Laura, you made a comment to it. Statistics are all over the place. Stories. You've got to talk about your daughters and your sons. You've got to talk about things that people can relate to, and that's really how to be effective. Generating free publicity. Hold free community events. Write editorials. Boy, this is a really important one right now. That, people will spend years trying to figure out how to get a reporter to cover their story. Well, guess what? If you write a really good letter to the editor, you can put that story in the newspaper. And editors are hungrier than you might think for quality letters and editorials to put in their papers. So I always want to remind people about that. Give away your news content. What's happening in the newspaper business right now is that whereas we used to have the, a little town called Benicia, which is just one of the hundreds of suburbs of San Francisco, And we have the Benicia Herald. And once upon a time, the Benicia Herald was probably Bill and Jane Smith who owned this thing, and then it passed down from their family from years to years. Well, now it's owned probably by one or two newspaper groups that own all these things across the country. They're all doing it with smoke and mirrors. They're all really hungry for content. Give them a free article. Say, you're welcome to use this. One of our experts wrote this. You'd be amazed. My publisher, 7 minutes, my publisher had me write a news article about my book when it came out. I said, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever done. She goes, no, make it as good as possible, tell everybody how wonderful it is, blah, blah, blah. It's really uncomfortable to do. I wrote this thing. I'm like, all right, here it is. Next thing I know, it's running all across the country. I'm like, what? And I thought, what a bunch of lazy journalists out there. But it was a powerful reminder that people are hungry for content. I'm going to put one shameless plug out here, but I'm going to take a few questions in my 6 minutes left, and then I'm going to hopefully talk to you in the hallway as well. I'm really, really more proud of this than anything in my life, short of Brianna and my other daughter. This is an organization that grew out of my own experiences about the power of helping ourselves by helping others. And what I found is the more that I've done this, get out and talk about my story, the healthier I become with OCD. And I find it's a universal principle. And about 2 years ago, I started working on a project that aims to network individuals who have turned their adversity into advocacy. Our friend Laura, a perfect example of this. Also provide pathways to advocacy for individuals who are looking to step into advocacy and don't know how. And then thirdly, to showcase the power of this process. I have a website, it's adversitytoadvocacy.org. Laura is one of our newest members, and we are building out a section of our website around eating disorders, and I would love to get some of you involved, all of you involved. We have ways to do that by becoming an ally. Would love to talk to you more about that as well. Here is contact information if you would like to follow up with me, and those of you who are out there on the internet and don't have access to me in the hallway, please drop me a note, and I would love to chat with you. So, look at that. Okay, I hope to have more time for Q&A, but I do have 5 minutes for a few questions, and then I will yield the microphone. So, who would like to start? Don't be shy. Yes?
You said we need to get into the experts Rolodex. Could you just briefly say a little bit on how part of that?
Thank you. Great question. So, yes, I would. The newsrooms are always looking for experts. And that expert, by the way, does not have to be the clinician. Oftentimes it is. And quite honestly, we do tend to go that direction more. But if you are a parent, for example, of a young man or young woman that's dealt with an eating disorder, and you have a powerful story to share, I could absolutely see KCBS going to you to talk about what it's like to live with an eating disorder in the family when we're trying to put our local angle on Senator Smith announcing that she has anorexia. So how do you become an expert in the Rolodex? The first thing you do is you introduce yourself to the assignment editor at that newsroom. You send them background information. If you've written a book about it, I mean, Lauren would be a perfect example. You could send your book to an assignment editor and say, I just want to introduce myself to you. I'm hoping that if and when you choose to do stories about eating disorders, that you might consider having me help you tell that story. And that's really all you need to do. And that step of just introducing yourself, if nothing else, if you get in the Rolodex, everything is by subject. And so when at KCBS we need to do a story about eating disorders, we look through it under E, there's eating disorders, and there you are as a phone number. We might not even remember the conversation, but we'll screen you off there. We'll call and see if it's somebody that we want to talk to. So, yeah. Thank you. Another question? Yes?
You were mentioning that OCD is being looked at now more as a neurological, biological disorder, and eating disorders are as well, but you still call it a mental illness. Do you see it moving away from being considered a mental illness and more neurobiological?
Boy, I think that's a great semantics question, and in our world, in the OCD world, we are referring to OCD as both a biologically based brain disorder and a mental illness, and not seeing those terms as mutually exclusive at all. But I'm so much less versed in the eating disorder world that I really could pull those two together, but in the OCD community, we talk about them being one, both. Yes?
So assignment editors get excited when they have a resource like us. So you're talking about us selling ourselves?
Yes.
What do they feel when we contact them and say, your language, once again, you're saying deaf and dumb. Once again, you're saying that anorexic. How do you handle that? How do you help the media shape the message appropriately and not offensively?
Another great question. And that is going to be in the tone and tenor of how you approach them. Because the reality is, we're journalists and we do get very defensive. It's like, what do you mean? You know, I did fine with this. And yet, I can think of several cases in my career where someone has written me a letter and told me that I've used a term that was less than sensitive, or that I was off on these facts or that fact. And every single time that that person has sent me a thoughtful note, it has made a real difference to me in how I have addressed that issue moving forward. And that's just one journalist. I know my bosses take that even more, not more seriously, but they're looking at the big picture. How does our newsroom refer to an issue? What terminology do we use and so forth? And that's, you know, something that we would take into consideration as well. I would try for one more question, but I am determined. This flash, that's going to hold us until flash.
No, we'll give it to you just so it'll make us all have to accept uncertainty.
Thank you again for this opportunity. I really look forward to meeting all of you.